in front of the camera.
Please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, and welcome to the regular meeting of the Attleboro School Committee for Monday, April 8th. This is your notice that this meeting is being electronically recorded. We are starting early tonight to host the public hearing for the fiscal year 2025 budget for the Attleboro Public Schools. Our regular school committee meeting will follow immediately after the public hearing. As a reminder to the committee, the public hearing is somewhat different from our regular open forum. We are not necessarily silent listeners. We are going to hear anyone speak for the budget, against the budget, or neither for nor against the budget. Anyone here that would like to speak will be given one opportunity to speak. And then if we do have questions for the speaker, we can ask. So with that, I will open the public hearing for the fiscal year 2025 Attleboro Public Schools budget. I would like to invite anyone interested in speaking for the budget. Is there anyone that would like to speak for the budget? Is there anyone that would like to speak in opposition to the budget? Anyone speaking in opposition? Is there anyone that would like to speak neither for nor against? If you'd like to, sure. And when you come up, if you could please state your name and address for the record, please.
I'm Jim Hawkins, and I'm state rep in Attleboro.
Welcome.
Thank you. Is this when you wanted me?
Sure.
Okay. A few things going on. The revenue this year isn't very good. So I don't know how successful we'll be making any changes to our allocation from Chapter 70. 3 years ago, we didn't do anything with Student Opportunity Act because it was during COVID. Then 2 years ago, we did, and they will listen to me. I asked them to change it from 7 years to 6 years, so each chunk would be bigger. And because we were thinking that Attleboro was not getting anything from Student Opportunity Act because of low enrollment, first graders not joining school because there was some confusion as to whether it's in person or not because of COVID. I was successful. They changed it from 7 years to 6 years. I'd say I was successful. I did it together with a handful of my colleagues from Leominster and Pittsfield and other similar cities. It was not me, but it was a small band. It was 8 of us out of 160 that lobbied for this. And they put a reserve for enrollment, but the enrollment didn't come back the next year, so that didn't help. Last year, it was across the board. All school districts were buried by the increase in out-of-district special ed costs, 14% increase at OSD, I think it was. So I asked for that. I always ask for the first appointments because if they're going to change anything to do with the budget, I need to ask early. They're not going to do it in the last week. That's already been decided. You take from one to give to the other, all that. So I always ask for the first one. And I asked for that, and they didn't do it in the budget. They did it in a separate bill a month after the budget. But there was a proviso in there that it couldn't be for any cities that still had COVID money left over, and Attleboro had COVID money left over, so that didn't do any good. So this time, enough of these one-time fixes. Let's fix the problem. Attleboro has always been in a desert that Superintendent Sawyer has always described more eloquently than I can. It's always been in a desert where we don't get the big bang from Student Opportunity Act. We don't get anything from Student Opportunity Act, and we don't have big revenues. It's not a wealthy city. We can't make up for that. So we need to change something in this, preferably something systemic. And rather than me, third time in a row, thank you, Chair of Ways and Means, for listening to me, but instead of me telling you what we need, how about if I just describe the problem and what can we do about it? One of the possibilities, I've got to thank Mark Furtado and Dave Sawyer and administration. I need a good presentation when I go into Ways and Means, and I got the best information between them. MTA is always at my call. They give me stuff, but the best information came from central office. And I went in, and he looks at my charts and says, oh, yeah, I already know about that. I know this is happening. Per pupil expense is the only way we can affect some schools more than others. And I said, well, what about the inflation cap, the 4.5% inflation cap, because inflation went up to 8 something, and I got kind of a blank response. But he agreed to consider that. Since then, I believe you have sent in a resolution in favor of that, as have several other cities. MTA has advocated for that. We don't know. I can't think of better, more support for this from around the state and from Attleboro to support changing the override for the inflation cap, making it a 3-year average, whatever you do, so that we can get the money. It's still a one-time fix, but one time we'll take it if we can get that. So I don't know if it's going to be in the budget, but they're talking about cuts to programs, so I'm not optimistic. So what MTA has asked me to do is file an amendment to ask for that if it's not in the budget. I won't know till Wednesday. The budget comes out at noontime Wednesday. That's the first crack we're going to have to see it. So sometime during the afternoon Wednesday, we'll find out. It's probably not going to be in there, and I will be filing an amendment to support putting it in there. I don't know if we'll get that either, but we don't go down without fighting. I would suggest, I believe you're working with a cohort of other school districts. I'm the one filing the budget, so reach out to me mid-afternoon. Everybody files budgets Wednesday afternoon, so the computer system is going to be slow. But once I have an amendment number and a name for it, you could reach around to your colleagues and ask them to ask their reps. You don't need to ask me because I've already done it, but your friends have to ask their reps to co-sponsor that amendment. No promises. This is not a good year, but don't go down without fighting.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. Representative Hawkins, sorry.
I'm having trouble being so formal. Thank you. This doesn't fit, but yeah, okay.
And just for clarification, as you were talking about meeting with them and what they do, you were referring to the House Ways and Means,
yes.
Committee.
So the budget goes from the governor first. That's when you get your information. Then we do our version of it in the House, and the Senate will take it up next, and then there'll be a conference committee. So it's not done if we don't get it in the House, but it's not too good if we don't get it in the House.
And so the Ways and Means budget you said is coming out this Wednesday.
At noon, yes.
The House will vote on that at the end of April, correct?
Correct. We'll debate it it's a holiday that week. So it's the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 23rd, 24th, 25th, something like that. It's the end of the week, end of that week.
Okay. And then goes on to the Senate for their
Then it goes on to
vote.
the Senate, yes, and then
vote
they'll
in
take it up. You could lobby with Senator Feeney for that also, but no point in doing that now because it's not in his hands. It's in my hands right now. I think I've said this to you. I was bothering Dave Sawyer in January for information on this. I think next year it's not going to be fixed this year. Best we'll do is get some sort of Band-Aid if we need to focus on this. So work with me in January, February. We'll hit them early with what seems to be the right ask.
Any other questions or comments for Representative Hawkins? Mr. Domenici?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Jim, for, stepping up and working with us to move this forward.
I'm one of you.
Yeah.
You forget this is where I came from.
We don't forget here. But just to clarify, we're really looking at like fiscal 23 and fiscal year 24, the inflation rates were well above the 4.5% cap.
Right.
So as a result of this formula not accounting for that,
Right.
we and many other gateway communities and probably other communities in the Commonwealth are somewhat shorted funds. Like we're not keeping up. I say shorted.
Probably about $3 million.
Yeah, I say shorted, but what it really is that we didn't adjust the formula to account for keeping pace with some fairly high inflation we haven't seen in decades. So, whether you want to call that shorting it or not, the formula is working as it's currently constructed. It simply doesn't work for fiscal year 23 and 24 for communities like us. So, and like you mentioned, anything that goes in, any amendments, any legislation, it's like a slow-moving ship. So none of us, I think, are expecting that we're going to get a miracle this year. But,
Well, we're actually putting this as for the next fiscal year.
okay.
To be realistic, they're talking about another round of 9C cuts. Maybe it's not.
Yeah, I mean, we're aware of what the landscape looks like on the state end. But
So we want to change the rules.
yeah.
thinking long-term is what we're hoping, but they probably, I kind of doubt they're going to even take the amendment, but if we can make a lot of noise, that's the right thing to do.
I agree, and I guess where I'm going with this is that I don't know. My hope is that we're not seeing inflation above 4.5 over the next several years. We simply don't know, but there's lost funds essentially, and so if there's a way to kind of recover those, I think that helps kind of move us along. I know you talk about a one-time fix, but that would be somewhat significant for Attleboro. We've seen calculations that are, you know, they range in the millions, you know.
Oh,
low
I've heard 3
millions,
million,
One
so-
or two, three, some calculations were a little higher.
Yep.
So that would definitely be, you know, I guess that's my point, where thank you for doing this.
Oh, I'm not
Just
saying I
ex-
don't want to do this, but I'm thinking we're still not out of the woods.
Oh, I
If-
agree.
If we're looking ahead for 5 or 10 years, we're still the lowest 6 school districts in the state benefit from Student Opportunity Act, and we're not one of the lowest.
No, absolutely. I mean, this is one piece of a larger puzzle for us.
So we'll keep clawing for one-time things, but we also need to work at how can we. Mr. Larson also suggested I should ask for a review of Chapter 74. The chair of education is not running for re-election, so there's no point bringing it up this session, but next session maybe. Student Opportunity Act took 8 years, so that's not a long-term fix, but if somehow that could benefit Attleboro, that would be a good thing to look at also.
My point to this is, you know, there's still some larger issues going on with the Student Opportunity Act in that the bottom dozen or so school districts seem to be absorbing the yeoman's share of all the funding. And so a community like ours tends to get stuck in that slightly more than the not-haves, but nowhere near the haves. So any help is helpful. I'm just saying, I'm looking ahead at, you know, I'm hoping inflation rates are not significantly high like that, where we continue to not keep pace. But at the same time, knowing that these last 2 years have cost us some significant funds, if there's a way to at least recover some of that would be fantastic. So any efforts that we can do to support you, and, you know, at least from my standpoint, you have it, and thank you.
Thank you. I just don't want to promise that I'm going to get this, because I don't know. This is a tough year, and we need to keep looking for other avenues. I don't think this should be the only one.
But I think it's noteworthy that, to Mr. Domenici's point, we know how badly the gateway cities were impacted because we're working with other gateway cities and we're looking at their specific impact. But the inflation cap, that impacted every community,
Yeah.
whether, regardless of your income. That if the state contribution to your school district had more than 7 or more than 4.5% inflation for FY23 and FY24, it was capped at 4.5. So that hit every district. It hit the gateway cities more, and those that benefit from Student Opportunity Act a bit more. But that hit all 351. So
Oh, there's been some noise.
Yeah.
So we'll see if they put it in Wednesday, and if they don't, we'll file the amendment. I've got a lot of friends who are going to co-sponsor it, but if you get the word out through your network, whatever, I don't know, you got Haverhill and a couple, I don't know what other districts you're working with, but make sure they
So-
reach out to their rep, and I'll tell you how to do that.
there's actually, that group is meeting again this Thursday.
Okay, well, that'd be a good place to do it.
Yeah, and they are already aware of your plans. But the districts that have submitted resolutions similar to what we approved at the end of March include Haverhill, Barnstable, Pittsfield, Holyoke, Everett, and Lawrence so far. And it sounds like there are some committees meeting this week that may do the same. So I know they were sharing. I got an email from a member of the Chelsea School Committee that they were going to copy our resolution to bring for a vote either tonight or tomorrow night. So
Good.
yeah,
Good.
we'll definitely keep you posted.
Well, we don't go down easy, that's all.
Any other questions or comments for Representative Hawkins? Excellent. Thank you very much for coming tonight, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thanks. Oh, yeah, you still have the meeting to go, don't you?
Is there anyone else here to speak neither for nor against the fiscal year 2025 budget for the Attleboro Public Schools? All right, seeing none, we will move, I will close the public hearing, and we will move on to our regular meeting. The first item on that agenda is for our Student Advisory Council update, and for that, I will turn it over to Mr. Bowie.
Again, nothing major update, a few couple tiny things. Weather's getting warmer, baseball's playing, they're doing well. We had our volleyball debut, which they did not pull through, but it was their first ever game, so proud of that team. Track team had a win. Softball team also had a win. I believe the tennis, both boys and girls won. I'm not sure if I'm missing anybody. Did I say softball? Softball also won. So we've had a good start to all the seasons. AP testing is coming up soon, so that's definitely going to play a factor to all the AP courses. The 2024, not spring, but April vacation trip is starting on Thursday, so that'll be, that group. Other than that, nothing major, no crazy consensus going on.
Excellent. Any questions for Mr. Bowie? Mr.
Yeah,
Domenici?
so what you're saying is like the boys volleyball, that's the first ever
First ever game of all time.
of all time. It's the first
All time.
time we've been able to have a boys volleyball team, so
Yes, it was their first
Yeah.
ever anything.
yeah, that's a big milestone.
It is
so,
a big milestone, yeah.
yeah, thank you for
They're playing
pointing that
tomorrow
out.
as well. So I believe it's home. I think so. I'm not 100%, but I believe it is. I think it might be, I want to say Durfee, but I'm not sure if I'm right on that.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Bowie. So with that, we will move into the superintendent's report. A lot of light discussion points tonight, Mr. Sawyer.
Yes, we really brought some business to do tonight. First, I want to give you a quick update on the big happening today, of course, was the eclipse. It's very clear to me that, per usual, Attleboro was a little bit ahead of the pack on this. A lot of credit goes to Ms. Regan and her team in making sure that we thought this through and were prepared and had the glasses all taken care of. There was a little bit of panic in some circles across the state a week or two ago when people realized that there was an eclipse coming and they hadn't been prepared and scrambling to do some of the things that we already had in place. So I certainly appreciate her efforts and her team's efforts to put us in a good position. No good deed goes unpunished. The media fury over the fake glasses led to some people requiring us to produce our credentials that we weren't supplying children with fake protective wear. But luckily, all of our purchases were fully credentialed, and at least the pair I used to gaze at the sun this afternoon didn't seem to do any damage. And so far, we have received no reports of any concerns. It's still early, so I'll certainly let the committee know if we find out that anything happened, but we believe all those efforts paid in the dividends of keeping everybody safe, which was the goal.
Mr. Bennett?
Just real quick, was attendance normal? I'm just curious if attendance was normal throughout the schools
I haven't
today.
seen any numbers, but the report, the anecdotal report was that we had quite a few dismissals.
Okay, that's reasonable. I kind of get that. Thank you.
Okay, so then, obviously, our big presentation this evening is on FY25. The good news is that although FY25 is going to be a challenging year for us, we believe that we have a really strong plan in place to make the most of the realities that we're facing. Some of you may have noticed that in the last week, there have been a couple stories in the paper related to conditions in other districts. And I have to say that I really feel for my colleagues. I know that the situations that many people are facing are quite difficult. This is all related to Chapter 78 this year that we've talked quite a bit about. The state's plan really resulted in just modest increases for all but 49 districts in the state. In fact, nearly half, 141 of the districts, received under 1%, an under 1% increase in Chapter 78. So that's a difficult situation to handle, and the results are that many districts are struggling to make ends meet. Now, as bad as that is for all of us, I have to admit that Attleboro is faring better than many communities. If the paper's correct, then we saw that North is looking at a 4.5% increase, and DR is looking at a 3.5% increase. And Mr. Furtado was about to explain how we're planning for a 5.3% increase. So the news is that we're faring slightly better than a lot of people under these conditions. But that just really prompts me to make the point that I keep making, that our problem is a problem of a different type. Because when we compare ourselves to these communities in a different way, we get a very different story. If we look at FY23, which is the last year that all the numbers are in for, North was funded at a 15.3% rate above net school spending. If Attleboro was funded at that rate, we would have $12 million more that year. DR is funded at a 24.3% rate above net school spending. If we were funded at that rate in 23, we would have had $20 million more. Attleboro in FY23, just for comparison, was funded at a 1.4% rate above net school spending. So I think confusing our problems with these problems, which, based on the feedback I received and people's comments about those articles, I think a lot of people do. They say, oh, they're talking about a lack of money. You guys talk about a lack of money. It's all the same thing. But it isn't the same thing. It's not even remotely the same thing. Because what they're facing, if I can summarize it, is that they're struggling to pay for things that we can't afford, right? Those are resources that benefit their students. Those are resources that our students don't have, things like lower class sizes, like extra supports. So my point is simply that our communities face significantly different challenges. But that is not the point of tonight's presentation, because we have worked hard to control our structural costs. And the mayor and the budget director have worked very hard to honor the city's commitments to the schools. And when you put these things together, we result in the landing place that we have for this year, that we're very lucky to say that we're able to deliver a level service budget. So to describe that in greater detail, I'll turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Regan to begin that presentation.
Thank you, Superintendent Sawyer. Tonight, our presentation, or the overview of our presentation, includes our overall overarching goals, the state's budget proposal, Attleboro's FY25 budget proposal, our educational priorities, which you've heard us talk about in December and you'll hear again tonight, and then our next steps in this process. So what are we striving to accomplish this evening? We want to make sure that there's a clear understanding of the state's budget proposal, what we have proposed as well, and how some of our educational decisions were made based upon the priorities that we've continued to present. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mr.
Thank you. Good evening. The governor's budget gave us a net school spending number of $102 million. We've had a series of meetings with the city to discuss what's possible within their context. And they were able to formulate a budget for the schools that are at about $103.8 million, which is slightly above what we proposed to the committee in December of $103.7 million for a level service budget. So the city was able to fund us at a level that met our needs to remain level service. It also obviously keeps them above net school spending. So the governor's budget gave us a total expected increase of about $5 million, again to the $102 million net school spending number, up from 97 the year before. As you heard Representative Hawkins explain, this is all very much in play. The House budget has not been proposed yet. That's coming, as he explained, Wednesday. Then there'll be a reconciliation process with the Senate. So these are going to bounce around a little bit. They're not going to bounce around significantly, I hope. Representative Hawkins introduced the concept of possibly cutting as the tax situation continues to erode at the state level, but we're hoping it's it'll get a little better, but it's going to be a marginal improvement, not a significant improvement, meaningful improvement. We, in our work with the city, DESE had not yet published the per pupil allowance for their credits. They did use a number. Interestingly, the number was increased by a greater rate than the Chapter 70 inflation rate. So we'll see if they have the guts to do that, maybe. And the other important point for the school committee is that the city is expecting to introduce the city's budget, including our numbers, on April 23rd, the municipal council. So these numbers at the state level are going to bounce around a little bit. I think at the city level, they're pretty locked in. So for 25, the mayor's net school spending appropriation, this is the line you will see in the city budget, is going to be $98,343,000. Transportation is going to be $5,537,000 for a total of $103,881. As Superintendent Sawyer pointed out, that's 5.3% above our current $98,710 for this year. As in, with every year, they pay us upfront about $75,000 in Medicaid reimbursements to get that rolling, because we actually charge staff costs to that account. So that starts, the staff cost starts in July. The revenues don't come in until September. So that's what that's for. And then in terms of impacts on our budget and why aren't we at 3%? The city has announced a health insurance increase premiums of 7.5%. So each percentage point is costing us about $150,000. Special education tuitions were above 3% again this year. 5 for private schools, 7 for collaborative schools. And then the continued dramatic increases in both special needs and McKinney-Vento transportation services in the private sector. As we had reported to the school committee, our gas and electricity commodity contract increases occurred at the renewal of the contracts. And then most recently, as the finance committee found out, water rates in the city are going to be increased by 21% per year for the next 3 years. And then sewer for next year increased by 9.5%. We still have a expensive labor adjustment to be made in one of our labor contracts going into next year. And then we continue to, in certain areas of our organization, suffer from an inability to hire staff. It's required us to go out and hire contracted vendors, which is always a more expensive proposition. But again, I want to really emphasize, I think we're going to be physically fine for 25. I think we're going to meet the needs of our students as we do every year. Our expectations in terms of a level service budget were met by the city that we're very grateful about, and we'll go forward from there.
Before we go on, next, does anyone have any?
Or do we want to get through the presentation and then bombard them with questions after?
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Regan.
So every single day, our teachers address student learning gaps. We scaffold new learning and really try to maintain grade level standards and expectations. And they all do this while balancing the behavioral and social emotional needs of all of our students. And as Superintendent Sawyer mentioned before, they do this every day with less than average resources. They continue to deliver high quality experiences no matter what, because they know that our students are relying As a result, we also continue to focus on, as a district, providing appropriate staffing for class sizes and support personnel for targeted interventions. You'll hear me talk a little bit more about this later on this evening as part of the Student Opportunity Act, but really this is focused on providing tiered supports for our middle school students and high school students with a review of the schedules and X block. There's always an increased need for inclusive practices, specifically for our students with disabilities, and particularly this year, the enrollment of our English learners has grown from, in FY22, from about 5.5%, in FY24, 7.6%, for a grand total of 478 students, and more than half of them are entering at a level 1 or 2, which means that they have little to no English when they enroll here with us. And so we continue to provide for them every single day, and the needs that they require is something that we are committed to doing. Another priority is to continue to incorporate the operating costs in this new building. And this includes utilities, equipment, maintenance, and additional staffing. We've been talking about this for a few years now. The ESSER funds have afforded us the ability to provide additional staffing and services, and we've come to rely on these services, and we have been able to absorb all of them into the operating budget for this school year. And so these include the K-2 paraprofessionals who have been trained pretty intensely in providing targeted intervention supports to students, the addition of our Director of Family Engagement and Assistance, and the Welcome Center has increased communication with our families. It's also helped to provide resources to students and families, and has become an invaluable resource to many. Behavioral and social emotional resources have also been able to guide our decision-making and support students and families both in and out of school. And we were able to maintain staffing and the learning management system for the Attleboro Virtual Academy. We're fortunate to be able to include these this year. And so to close out our priorities and where we're going next, there'll be the release of the proposal, as Representative Hawkins said, coming up on the 12th. It was estimated. School committee approval will be on the 22nd, and the mayor's submission to municipal council is expected to be on the 23rd. And then the release of the final state budget.
Thank you. So for the committee's sake, I'm going to take a crack at something new for this budget discussion, because these conversations tend to get ornery and a little out of whack. So what I'd like us to try to do is, as we ask questions, kind of do it in a few different phases. First being questions related specifically to funding, along the lines of what Superintendent Sawyer referenced back in December, that really we're struggling with funding, not so much budgeting. So starting with the funding piece and then going into budgeting. And if you have questions about specific budgeting pieces, we can, I'm not suggesting that we go line by line through the 15 or so tabs in the spreadsheet that we received. But if you have any specific budgeting questions, then we can go about it that way. Does that make sense? So I will say, this is my 9th budget on the school committee. It's, for most of us, this is our 3rd mayor and our 3rd budget director, and we have tried very hard to meet all of the needs or requests from the city. But as we heard from Representative Hawkins tonight, where it's consistently been an uphill battle, where we're facing a bad formula at the state level, and we will continue to support him in his efforts to correct that. But that becomes compounded when the city is unable to contribute as much as we need as well. And I think in the past, there are some that would say that the lack of funding to education from the city was by choice, and I don't think that's the case this year at all. I think that this is far more a lack of available funding. And so while we have for nearly a decade talked about the gap between what we have and what we need to properly serve our students and families, not what we want and not our wish list, just what we actually need. In that time, while we have updated our budgeting, that gap has grown, which is indicative of why the 1.35% inflation rate from the governor was a little absurd. But that being said, we're now at this crossroads where what we've been saying about Attleboro is now a problem statewide. And I think we're starting to recognize, those that are paying close attention, we're starting to recognize that this isn't just a school district problem, and this is an every department in Attleboro problem. Every department in this city is underfunded. Every department in this city is facing tough questions, and it looks like the next couple of years are not that much more promising. So we are where we are for FY25, and so that's why I think this budget discussion is critically important. But we need to start, as a community, we need to start thinking about FY26 and beyond, and how those concerns are going to be addressed as well. I could go on for much longer, but I will pause there and ask, does anybody have any questions for the administration related to funding in general? We'll start there. Mr. Domenici?
Yeah, just the one. You have the bullet point about the contracted services. In other words, just contractors cost more. But we also had other supports that were being covered by ESSER funds. How is that working with this budget?
Again, we, go through, I'll call it cycles, where as people retire, as people leave, we're able to bring in less expensive people who are younger, starting off on their respective scales. We just turned over practically the entire maintenance department. So those kinds of things have happened in a way that have allowed us to assume what we had on ESSER. We're also operating this year, as you know, in a circumstance where we're expecting a sizable surplus at the year's end out of a fear of that, and that's going to help us assimilate those costs as well.
Thank you.
Any other funding? Mr. Bennett?
Yeah, I have a question about the surplus. I'm trying to figure this out. So we're going to generate a surplus. Do you know, is it like $500,000 or $600,000, or is it?
Oh, we had this kind of conversation in finance. It'll be north of that. We have routinely been below 0.5% at the end of the year, which when you start talking about $1 million budget is $500,000 in and of itself. So we're gonna be a little north of that, possibly a point, at $1 million. That was our original goal, to get out of the year at $1 million and have that available to us for what we expect for next year.
So I know that the city has directed us to try to roll up that surplus by spending as much ESSER funds as possible, right?
We had to exhaust ESSER.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, so we did that, and we generated that surplus.
We're hoping we did it.
Sure.
We'll see in June. But yes, that's correct.
So in the money over net school spending,
Yep.
that is in this budget, does that include a return of any of that projected surplus, or what happens to that surplus at the end of the budget?
Well, we'll end the year, we'll have a number and that number will typically come back to us upon certification of the city's free cash in November.
Oh, so there could be an infusion of another $1 million
There will
that's
be an
not,
infusion.
that's not on this budget right here?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I just wanted to make
Yeah,
sure
yeah,
I
yeah.
understood where, that, I know we had generated a surplus with an understanding that it was coming back. Or,
Right.
you know, but those things are never final until you get the money, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So just to clarify on that process, the city's funding, the city surplus will be certified in November,
October, November, yep.
and the city has to approve what money comes back to the school department.
Correct.
So if they were to get $1 million back in surplus, it's possible that they could retain 250,000 of it and send only 750,000 to us, correct?
Correct.
Hypothetically.
Yep,
Just,
yep.
yeah.
So
So
we
it's,
don't want to count our chickens until
Right.
they're here, right?
Right.
Fair. So that's why that's not in the budget, because
Right.
you don't know if it's coming or not.
No idea.
All right,
Yeah.
perfect, thank you.
any other funding-related questions? Mr. Larson?
Mine is not a question, it's more of a statement. And I guess I'm hoping that the community is starting to understand that the state's formula for calculating school funding is just mathematically flawed. There's fixed percentage caps that we've talked about, 4.5%, that are in their formula. The increases to medical insurance, electricity, gas, special ed tuitions, transportation, McKinney-Vento, out-of-district placements are all in excess of 4.5%. And that's happened for so many years that I've lost track.
Yeah.
The mismatch that exists between that 4.5% cap and the reality of the numbers on that screen, we keep taking small steps backwards. And that's how we've kind of gotten to this point. And I don't really think the community quite understands enough of the calculation to understand that the calculation every year hurts us a little bit more, hurts us a little bit more. And, the city does what the city can do, but the city is facing a lot of these increases on their side of the budget also. So they've got to cover for the other 18 or 20 departments in the city, their electric bill, their water bill, their sewer bill, their gas and electric, and their health insurance. So in the last 3 years, we've had a lot of COVID money to kind of make up for some of these gaps and the rest of it. COVID money's over. We're going to have a little, as you said, maybe a 1% surplus coming back in November that we can, if we're smart, we'll hold on to it, we'll sit on it like a mother hen and use it for 26, because 26, the way I'm calculating it, is going to be hurting.
Yep.
And because if we take another small step back and we have all these increases again, which there's no reason to think that that's not going to happen, the city's going to be in a situation 12 months from now that's going to have to make some real hard decisions.
And to your point, Mr. Larson, I couldn't help but chuckle as just exactly what you were talking about. 21%, 13%, 9.5% in all of our utilities, 7.5% for insurance, et cetera, et cetera. And not only is the inflation capped at 4.5%, but this year the inflation number that was used was 1.35. So it wasn't even that they went up to the cap. It was that they came in less than a third below the cap, which I think Mr. Furtado, I don't remember I think irresponsible was the word he had used to me.
I think I said, see if they have enough guts to do it, yeah.
So it truly is remarkable. And also,
It's 25 to 30% of our budget that we keep
Right.
taking a step back, and a step back on. And
yeah, and to your other point, the city is dealing with this in every department, and I think all of us here knows that if we're relying on the city, that we can't rely on the city to close our gap, because that's going to be catastrophic for every department in the city. But it's, yeah, truly is remarkable. Any other funding questions or comments? From a budgeting perspective, like I said, this is what it is. Just a couple of updates and thoughts before we grill Mr. Furtado and everyone else on each budget that was presented to us. Earlier this year, when I think it was in a finance subcommittee update, we were told that the city is no longer looking into a community-wide solar program. I did ask the administration to prepare a potential plan for us to look into renewable energies at all of our buildings, and I asked them to present that to our infrastructure subcommittee at their May meeting. And I'm going to ask that the mayor and the city council prioritize this and any other capital improvement that can reduce our operational costs from year to year. Back in the fall, I had also asked about the possibility of redistricting, and I know that's something the administration is looking into. That can greatly help us with transportation costs across the district. I've also asked my predecessor, Chairman Withers, to revitalize the Attleboro Public Schools Foundation. This was a nonprofit that was started just before the campaign to build a new high school. And so that group kind of took a back seat to the high school campaign, and the goal of that organization was to raise private funds that could benefit the school district for potential capital or one-time expenditures that could provide some long-term fiscal flexibility to the district as well. The administration is optimistic that in the coming weeks, we might be able to announce some programs here at the high school that might be able to generate some additional revenue to the district. And so we will continue to keep in touch with Representative Hawkins, Senator Feeney, Representative Scanlon, for any help they can give us at the state level. And Mayor DeSimone and the city council knows that we're open to help with anything they need to get a better financial outlook for the city. So with that, Mr. Furtado?
In that regard, there was apparently a meeting in the city today with the consultant who had kind of advised them through that initial solar panel process under Mayor Haru. And I received a communication from the city regarding our properties and our roofs, and asking for specifics on what would be available for development. And I don't know what that means in terms of the ownership of the facilities that they intend on looking at, and where the revenues go or anything like that. They were just looking for, our parking lot's still available, our roof's still available, and I owe them a response to that. That all happened this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Furtado. When I met with the mayor a couple of weeks ago, she mentioned that she was going to look into that citywide again. But in the meantime, just in case it falls through, let's do our due diligence so we have a plan B in place. So any budget-related questions? Mr. Domenici?
Yeah, I have one, but just before I do, when do you have a responsibility to provide that information back to the city administration? I'm just thinking ahead. It was clearly, Sun Chronicle chronicalized all the different capital improvement projects that the city council, took a tour of. And for us, we have 2 roofs that need repair. So before we can put anything else on those roofs, we have to consider the repairs of those, and then 2 other buildings that, though they're fine structurally and can probably survive a nuclear war, for God's sakes, there is some changes that might need to be made to 2 of our older elementary schools, so adding additional things to roofs. So I'm just curious when you have a response due. We don't have to litigate that all tonight. But as we have an infrastructure and facilities meeting in May, you may already have to provide answers before that, so I'm just curious.
I would certainly think before May, they would expect some answer. Again, it's just an inventory of what would be available.
Sure. Understanding that lots also play a role here, like that was kind of the primary the last time around. As far as budget goes, maybe it's more of a statement and maybe it's just a confirmation. Chairman Geddes mentioned the idea of redistricting, and I happen to notice, while we're roughly about 5.3% of an increase in the overall budget, 2 elementary schools in particular are significantly higher to that. I noticed some larger line items for educational hires, teacher hires. So I was just curious if that also was due to maybe the influx of how people are coming into the city, or if it was just identified that, and I'm speaking in particular to Hill Roberts and Willett. I was just curious because most of the other schools are in line with that number, but those two seemed a little bit high. So I was curious if that was more to do with influx of students or an identification of needs in those particular buildings that required additional hires.
It was the expectation of moving programs to those schools. I don't think the enrollment overall is going to change dramatically, but the mix within the enrollment is going to change.
Yeah, I noticed the other schools, there were some line items that dropped, so I didn't know exactly how to tick and tie all that out, but I figured I could get a quick answer, and thank you.
And just to clarify, any redistricting that does happen, that's fall 25 at the earliest. At
Oh,
this
sure.
point. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
But I mean, we're getting new properties built left and right, and sometimes that just means that new kids that come in have to go to whatever school has the capacity to take them. And so I wondered if maybe some of those schools, well, it's kind of small. So that one surprised me a little, but your answer about moving a program or two over there makes a little more sense.
And that fall of 26 would be the earliest. There's no way to get redistricting.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I knew what you meant when you said that.
Still, I'm
That
thinking
was the answer. That was all I had.
Yeah.
So thank you.
FY 25 is still in my brain. Mr. Frappier?
Thanks. We're talking about moving the students around the city to different schools and such. We are in, how long is our current bus contract for? Is it a 3-year deal?
Next year, we'd be entering the 3rd year of 5.
So the only negotiable in there would be that we'd be able to decrease by reducing the amount of students we go around the city would probably be the gas line item that's variable that we pay year to year. It wouldn't be the number of buses, it wouldn't be the number of,
You could absolutely address the buses, depending on how it would.
we could potentially see a decrease in the number of buses and also in our gas expenditures by shorter routes and fewer buses.
Yeah. So again, for instance, Willett, it's always full. It's never not full, right? And that's a function of the neighborhoods in that district, expanding beyond the capacity of the school. So you would kind of redraw those lines and make Willett more accessible and therefore not requiring buses to drive their students to schools with openings wherever those may be.
Just a quick follow-up. Mr. Domenici had mentioned all the new homes and potential increases in enrollment to a couple of elementary schools. I know we're certainly not to the point of enrolling new students yet, but how well attended were the kindergarten information nights back in March? And can we use that as any indication as to what numbers might look like for incoming kindergartners for next fall?
We can year, but we also get the census in, which might be very helpful to us as well. We'll compare to see how if they balance out and if we should be looking for certain students. But that every year we've seen that it does a pretty good job representing how many students you're going to get, but typically we start having to push out again by the end of the year, saying don't forget to register if you have a 5-year-old. You might so that practice will begin soon. We have a pretty average enrollment right now for kindergarten, but we can certainly start pushing out more communication to get parents in.
Thank you. So in case anyone couldn't hear from home, it sounds like attendance was about the same as previous years, so we're expecting about the same number of kindergartners. Okay, perfect, thank you. And do we feel like we've caught up to, this is probably impossible to answer, but I think in the past 2 or 3 years, we've probably had at least 100 homes built in this city. Do we think that we've caught up to those potential students coming in, or is there no way to?
I'm not sure right now.
Yeah, I didn't expect there to be a definitive answer on that, but thought I would throw it out there. I've got plenty more questions I can keep, but does
I have
anybody?
a couple, I mean.
Mr. Bennett, go ahead.
I have a couple, I actually typed up a lot of questions, but I don't think we need to go as crazy as I went in digging into this yesterday, because I haven't looked at one of these before. But in general, I have some questions about places that I expected to see increases and did not. For example, in the special ed item, it shows a $205,000 decrease. And I was surprised to see that because, you know, special ed is such a huge portion of the school budget. How did we happen to anticipate spending $200,000 less?
So, personnel line item?
Oh, that's in the personnel.
I
All
don't know,
right,
is that what line you're talking about?
so on the summary roll-up, special education rolls down as savings as a anticipated.
Oh, as a department.
2.6% decrease, yeah.
So, again, we haven't had much success hiring certain positions within special education. So for the 2024 budget, our current budget, we sort of kept the vacant positions in the hopes of hiring and then eliminating the contracted services line, which was also there because we had obligations to pay contracted vendors. For the 25 budget, those positions came out to be a little more clear on the budget. And if we are able to make hires, we'll simply transfer the money immediately from contracted services into the salary lines.
So,
The other thing we did is we anticipated tuitions where part of what we will do with some of the surplus at the end of the year is prepaid tuitions for 25, rather than put ourselves at risk. So that would have decreased those lines a little bit too.
so if I pulled up the special ed budget itself, I would see probably in there the corresponding professional services offsets to that more
You
than.
see the contract line, the individuals are in the schools and they reside in.
Oh, so each contractor that we hire in place of a special ed professional, that shows up in the school, not in the general special ed.
It shows up in both, but there's a greater majority of them in the schools.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. I knew there was a reasonable explanation, right? The other questions I have is really small, but every school has, or most of the schools have anticipated decreases in the fuel, here in heating gas. How is that? Is that a miracle?
No, no, that cost us $6 million. This was our first year where we had a substantial run. It didn't start at the beginning of the year, but we had a substantial run operating under all of the new equipment the train installed over the last 2 years. So we were able to project utility costs being much lower than what was budgeted for '24 based on the performance of those devices, both heat and cooling.
I mean, then they're more than glorified Nest thermostats, but it's that sort of general idea.
Yeah, well, again, you know, we replaced original equipment in most of the buildings. So we're replacing, you know, in some cases 60s, 70s technology with 2024 technology, and the efficiency has been substantially better. So.
Okay, so in the years past, we invested money to replace these facilities, and that's where.
Well, yeah, we just finished phase one of that we're still cleaning up some things, but substantially finished phase one of that process about 3 months ago. So we had no idea how things were going to operate. This was the first, again, extended period where we were operating under the new equipment, and it has performed probably better than contracted guarantee. So we were able to, again, be aggressive for '25 in terms of what our expectations are in terms of costs, but that's based on consumption. The rates made it not as good as it could have been.
Right.
because they increased so dramatically.
That makes perfect sense to me. The only other question I had is really kind of a trivial one, and I think I know the answer, but I was just looking back through previous years, and instructional technology from FY19 to FY20 went from like $10,000 to like $300,000. Was that the virtual academy?
No, that was the, in the OIT budget on the bottom?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was the start of our, Chromebook process. So our first foray, again, we had anticipated doing a bunch of leases, and we've had years in there where we were able to do actual purchases. And then with the COVID money, that money was able to be used for technology as well, especially with remote learning during COVID and all that stuff. So we did a lot of purchasing. We did do some leasing, but we did a lot of purchasing within that whole time frame. And next year, we're going to actually go back to the leasing model and fund basically, a lease is a 4-year term and fund a quarter of what we're going to need through the lease.
Okay. That makes sense. That's largely the sort of questions I had without digging into what's $250 versus $225 or whatever. Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Frappia?
Just a follow-up to what Council Committee Person Bennett was just saying. For the AVA expenses, I know largely it's coming out of the high school for the instructors itself, but what page on the budget would we find the administrator and any other AVA expenses?
So there aren't a lot of AVA expenses, which is, sort of the good news. The administrator is in the principal line for the high school. The other significant expense is the software, the Ingenuity software, which is in the instructional support budget under curriculum. And that's a pretty modest, I don't know off the top of my head, I'm going to say $50,000. It's not a major expense, so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You mentioned COVID funds and ESSER funds. Where is it safe to say, I know we've tried to build those into the operating budget. Is it safe to say that a big reason why we couldn't grow staffing in other places is because the last of the ESSER funded positions are coming onto the operating budget?
Yes.
And so
Very safe.
and so there's no, we're not losing any of the ESSER funded positions to those funds expiring in September, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Any other, Ms. Johnson, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I noticed that in the ACA, looked like there was a pretty significant increase in the overall budget. And I was wondering if you could just talk about that a little bit more, if that's tracking along with enrollment.
Yes. So we sort of broke ground on a middle school program this year, during the year, that was originally envisioned as being a modest endeavor, half a dozen students, an administrator, and it's turned into 20 students, and it's a thing. So that's why 25 looks substantially bigger. There's more support for that group than we didn't expect the group to be 20, but.
Right, so it's due to growth in that program, and
Yeah.
it's tracking. Okay, I figured that was probably it. And then I also wanted to talk a little bit more, talk about the professional development. The overall increase is negligible, I would say, but I noticed in some areas there was significant increases, in other areas there were significant decreases. So, like I said, the net growth wasn't terrible. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, why those monies were rearranged and what efficiencies we may have found by making those changes.
Yeah, so at the coordinator level, we had improperly assigned some people to other budgets and had to bring them back to what I think is called a teaching line in that particular budget, so
Is, yes.
that's what caused that bump there. You'll see offsets in other departments, but
Yes. Okay, all right. I figured that's what, it was something along those lines. I just
yeah,
wanted
that was an accounting mistake. That was.
to let it go this one. Thank you for the information.
We've also heard a couple of times about contracted services, and I know that over the years, we've talked about out-of-district special education programs and assessing on a year-to-year basis, is it less expensive to keep those students in district with one specific program? Are those included in how much of that is included in the contract services? And with the rest of the contracted services, how long are we locked into those for the entire year, or until we have staff that could provide those needs for the district?
Yeah, the notice requirements on the contracts is very small. I think it's 2 weeks. So within the timeframe of onboarding a new employee, they can be let go. It's not an expense to do the transition. But the contracted services line was pretty modest prior to, I want to say 22 or 23, I forget which, but, went from sort of five figures to $1 million the next year, and now it's $1.5 million. So, and again, we played around a little bit, thinking it was a temporary condition. It's no longer thought of that way, and so it's a more formal budget at this point.
And then the other question I had was, there was a dramatic increase for professional salary for professional development.
Yeah.
For some reason, I always thought we outsourced a lot of our professional development. So do we have someone in-house that's managing professional development? That just surprised me.
Yeah, again, that was Ms. Johnson's question, is that we had put one of the coordinators in the wrong budget line and brought her back to that line. It's a person that we put in the wrong place,
Thank you.
mistakenly put in the wrong place.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Mr. Furtado.
Thank you.
I don't think you're going too far, though.
Yes, item 2, Mr. Furtado. NRG, you're asking for a motion.
I am. It came to my attention that we did not, we had a discussion, I know we had a discussion, we debated 1 year, 3 years, but we did not formally vote on the new gas rates for, that started, unfortunately, April 1st through Energy, so we need a motion to approve the new 3-year contract.
All right, so I will entertain a motion to approve a 36-month natural gas contract with NRG at a rate of $7.92 MMBTU. Forgive me, I don't know that exact unit. From May 1st, 2024 through April 30th, 2027.
So moved.
Second.
All right, I think we did vote, but it was just on the decision between 3 years and 1 year. So,
Okay.
so we did have a vote. It just wasn't on this. You are correct. Any questions or thought, Mr. Frappier?
Just to make sure, this is the same exact deal that we talked about a few weeks ago that we agreed and nothing's changed?
Same deal.
Enough.
Any other questions or comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Furtado. Time I'll turn it back over to Assistant Superintendent Regan to talk about the Student Opportunity Act.
Thank you. The Department of Ed has asked us to submit our plan for the Student Opportunity Act. It requires each district in the Commonwealth to create one of these plans with 3 criteria. First criteria was to identify the student groups targeted for accelerated improvement, and so after an analysis of our data and the areas that we needed or that demonstrated the most significant disparities. The English learner subgroup and our students with disabilities were the two areas that we are targeting through this plan. They also asked us to describe the evidence-based programs that we will use to address the disparities. And so we have been working on this for quite some time from the last Student Opportunity Act and from grants that we currently have right now. And so we're continuing to implement our current program for literacy in grades 3 through 6, which is Into Reading. We'll continue to do that next year as well with continued professional development, and then expand that out to grades 7 and 8 for a new literacy curriculum for them. We'll also be implementing a program for our English learners in grades 3 through 12. And so we've done all of the preliminary work in terms of vetting a new curriculum and visiting it and having teachers take a close look at it. And so we'll be continuing with that next year. That's one of the other programs. And then finally, given these programs and investments, what do we plan to do in order to improve student learning? And so number one is to provide effective programming for our multilingual learners based upon just structural and also materials and resources. Supporting or continuing to support the implementation of our ELA curriculum in grades 3 through 6 and expanding out to grades 7 and 8. And then taking a close look at the comprehensive tiered supports that we have for our middle school and high school. And that includes looking at the schedule for middle schools to provide time within the school day to provide targeted interventions. And so we expect that given the implementation of these areas that have been identified, that will increase learning and student outcomes for all of our students, but specifically our English learners and students with disabilities. So this was all outlined in the memo that was provided to you along with the larger plan. And so if you approve, I do need a motion to approve the Student Opportunity Act.
All right, I will entertain a motion to approve the Student Opportunity Act information as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Great work. Thank you very much.
At this time, I'd like to call up Ms. De Palma, Director of Family Engagement Assistance, to update the committee on residency.
Good evening.
Good evening. Welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here. I know a few meetings back, there were some questions about residency. That falls into the Welcome Center bucket of things that we do, so that I wanted to be able to answer those questions and any other questions you might have tonight. When it comes to residency, the first thing, that usually comes to mind is funding, allocating funds to students who perhaps don't live here. That I know is a valid concern and is very worrisome. But what I can tell you is that a lot of our residency investigations tend to happen a little bit further into the year. So our students that are here are included in the enrollment data that's sent to the state in October. So we typically have them built into that budget piece, but that doesn't mean that it's not a valid concern. But I did want to put that out there as just information that I'm not sure that you would be thinking about when it comes to residency. But funding or not, a major concern is that we want to make sure that ensure our services are focused and provided to residents of Attleboro. And we know that our staff work hard, and we want to make sure that they're focused on our students who live here. And that's why it is incredibly important that we follow up on residency concerns or issues or any suspicion of somebody not living here. With that, there's a lot of pieces to residency, and there's a lot of, sometimes complicated situations that can come up through residency. And one of the questions that you'd asked directly was, how do you hear about a suspected residency issue? Typically, A lot of our school staff report it because, the Rhode Island plates are spotted in drop-off or pickup. That doesn't always mean that it's we'll be able to confirm that. Sometimes it's a grandparent picking up. Sometimes it's a parent that lives in Rhode Island coming to pick up, and there's a custodial situation. So we do take it serious, and we do look into it. Student sharing is usually probably number one. They kind of out themselves as they're talking, about where they live or where they don't live, especially in their younger grades. Friends sharing, oh, I know that they don't live here, that kind of thing gets reported. And anything along those lines, just conversation or journal writing will often sometimes pop in there. The other way is transportation reports. So they'll, either a bus driver's, reporting a suspicious pickup or a drop-off, or this car pops in and then, leaves, those kind of things. Address usage, those, something that they're not, that they're hearing through when they're registering for fee-for-service or something like that. Another one is typically like a resident will call in to either a principal or tell a teacher, or, call into central office and report it. Attendance concerns that lead to residency investigations. There are certain tells that you kind of wonder why that's happening, so we look into that. Returned mail, which I tend to, just kind of, we quickly go through to see, what it could be. And sometimes, again, they don't all lead to a true situation, but oftentimes they do. And just family slip-ups, to be perfectly honest, is one of our biggest ones. Because the people who are trying, who are following the rules, are trying really hard, to get through the system, are pretty good at what they do, but there's often something that happens along the way that we go, something's up here. I know, how seriously do we take residency during registration was another conversation. We are very serious about it throughout registration. We adhere to the school committee policy to the letter. So we are asking for everything required. We are double checking and triple checking. There are sometimes where some cases are unusual or that we have to kind of investigate a little bit more. And there's always one-offs of a situation that, where you have a family that's struggling for whatever reason and that we need to kind of really take a look at. And see if they truly live here or they don't. If we feel that there is any concern during the registration process that a student may or may not be living here, and there can be a lot of, things that can heighten our radar, we will let that family know then that we take residency very, very seriously and the investigations do occur. Because we want to be upfront with them before if we go any further. So that's usually something we very, very clear with the families, like, oh, just so you know, you want to make sure that we're adhering to the school committee policies. Situations that impact residency policy itself. We have cases where we have McKinney-Vento students who we're transporting. They might not live in the city, but we were their last origin, last city of registration. So we are connected to those students. And we are required to provide an education to those students if they meet the McKinney-Vento requirements. We now have community liaisons in all the buildings that will check in every year with each of our McKinney-Vento students to ensure that they're still either under the guidelines, or if they're not, we'll see what we can do to move them along and off the McKinney-Vento list. But it's not easy to do, but we have had many families who have, but right now in the state, we are seeing an increase in McKinney-Vento and truly homeless families struggling out there. Another one is custodial agreements. Custodial agreements with families, really, you'll have a student who does, potentially live partially somewhere else and here. And then, of course, for foster care, which is, again, on the increase. We have a lot of foster students, and we will meet, both districts will meet to discuss what's in the best interest of the student, and then move forward with, from there for that student's care, and determine who's responsible fiscally for those kids. what happens often is we'll hear, like so-and-so lives, in Pawtucket, I know he comes here, and I know that's the favorite, and I know he lives here. And there are times when that, it could be true, but there's typically a reason. Now, if there isn't a reason, that means we don't know about it yet. So we love to be made aware of it. And that's when we're able to really do our best work. We've been able to focus more on residency in the last couple of years since I've been able to move into this role. It's a big job. It can take up a good portion of everybody's time in order to do it well, because it involves, being at houses, it involves sending people out to homes, it involves, driving by home, really having conversations with families. There's a lot to this, and I can't tell you all our roots, but we really try hard to make sure that when we do talk about residency or we take a student to a level of a disenrollment, that it's for good reason, good cause, and our evidence is solid, because we want to make sure we're not going to disrupt this family if we don't have real solid evidence to do so. So the potential outcomes are an investigation, which would include one of two people going to buy the home to see, a very straightforward, do you live here? Or who does live here? That's probably our number one, thing to do. We have bus stops and pickup checks and those kind of things where we'll kind of keep an eye out, and we'll have somebody specifically to watch that. And we also request for updated residency from families, which will often lead us to, it's difficult to prove if you, that you live here if you don't, which is helpful. Along with that, there are other methods that we use as well, but those are our main ones. So should we find evidence, and we find enough evidence that they most likely do not live here, we're going to request either them to prove residency or for additional information, because sometimes from that we discover that they're McKinney-Vento, we discover that there is another situation that oftentimes families aren't comfortable saying that I've lost my home or I've lost my, so we have to help them through that. But they're still living here. That's not always true, but sometimes it is. If we have enough evidence where it's very clear that this is like a slam dunk case, they will receive a letter of disenrollment, giving them the outlines of the law and the expectation and the policies, along with the possibilities of next steps from the district, but also a time frame for them to be able to register in the city where they live. So that's the basics of residency statistically. Now, I know you asked for a little bit of stats. So we don't have a solid database from years prior. But this year was a year where I was really trying to take it on a little differently and be able to collect data, so in future years we're able to have a better look at what we're doing and the work that we're doing. This year alone, we've done 51 investigations, which that's a significant number of investigations. We have disenrolled 22 students and discovered that they do not live here in Attleboro. We've had 3 with special circumstances where we had to either, it was a foster care or something along those lines. We had 6 that we confirmed their residency, that they did live here. We had 7 that needed to just change their address, that they lived here, but they hadn't completed the address change. And that we have currently 13 that are still under investigation right now because we had a little bit of an influx just recently. So that's kind of number-wise where we are. The other big question is, where are most of these happening? The high school has 13, purely it's the size of the building. We did 13 for the school this year. And then every other building it's around 5. The average is about 5 per building. The high would be like Wamsutta and or like Hyman, Fine Hill, Roberts are probably run a little bit higher, but not by much. So it's the average is about 5 per building, and that's a normal year. And that would, even as a principal, I probably did that in my time as well when I was at Studley. So I probably between 3 and 5 per year, where I was investigating whether or not a family lived in where they said that they did. Last year, I can confirm 6 disenrollments, but I can't, I'm not sure of the total number because I didn't quite track it the way I am now, which I think will be helpful information as we move forward.
Absolutely.
Any other questions that you might have right now?
I mean, I think we should be flattered that so many people want to be a part of the Attleboro Public Schools. But as you said, this is a concern, and I know that there are some in the community that think this, that, to your point, see a Rhode Island license plate, or see someone drive in from North Attleboro and stop at a bus stop. Well, maybe they just went to Dunkin' Donuts in North Attleboro because that's the closer one before the bus stop. And so things aren't always as they seem, but I know there is a lot of work that does go into this, so I appreciate it.
We've had some fascinating cases.
Ms. Sawyer?
Thank you. I was wondering, what kind of documents do you ask people to provide?
Or during the residency itself, or just in general? We do all this basic policy from the Attleboro School Committee policy. So we need column A, we need column B, and we need column C. So like that's your billing, your mortgage, your lease, purchase and purchase order, not purchase order, purchase and sale agreement, or notarized legal affidavit. For column A, for column B, it's bills, but it has to be from water, gas, oil, electric, telephone, or cable, and it has to be dated within the last 45 days, or we won't accept it. And then column C is an ID. So that can take a few different forms, but we do require that along, or we would, if dated within the last year, a W-2 form, vehicle tax bill, or something like, or property tax bill, or a letter from an approved government agency.
Thank you.
So we ask,
That's quite
we actually ask
quite
for quite a bit.
selection.
And we're, if you hear my folks up front ever during registration, they're like, oh no, we take residency very seriously. No, and they won't budge from what they're expected to collect, unless it's an extremely unusual case.
Thank you.
Ms. Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't even know if this data is available, but this amount of disenrollment or even investigations, how does that fall in line with other districts?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'd have to review.
I don't even know if that's.
No, I think all districts do it to some degree or another.
I'm sure.
I wouldn't be able to speak to that.
It's not something that's reported, so we'd
Okay, that's
have
what-
to ask around.
Okay, so, and not necessarily, that was more of curiosity, so, thank you.
I'm curious too.
Mr. Bowie?
I was just wondering, when you do enroll or de-enroll that student, when's the date that you would do that? Is it shortly after you find out specifically, or is there a clean break at the end of the school year, or depending on what trimester they're in? What's like the typical day that you'd send them out?
There's a few factors that can come into play. Typically, we do a 10-day turnaround, 10 work days, so that the parent has time to register in their new district or their city where they're living. But there are some other factors. If we're coming up, against April break, we'll use April break as that, because it's a clean break. And it gives an opportunity, for a little extra time to be able to do what they need to do. Sometimes closest to you're really close to the end of the year, come June 1st, we're going to let you finish out the year. And we can have that discussion. That's when you have to really take each case and take a look at where the student is and what's going on and what's in the best interest overall.
And is that communicated to the other district, or do you make that connection to the other district, or do you let the family do that?
I don't always know which district they're in.
Okay.
So oftentimes I'm able to find their location, but not always.
Got it.
I am now the person who, people need to find somebody they'll ask. Because they probably can find you, but, it's not always known. And it is the parent's responsibility to register in their home city. We do monitor it, though, because if we never hear from that school, we will follow up, especially if we have concerns about the student's welfare.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Bennett?
It's just a quick, is there a mandate for like a kindergarten teacher? If a kid says, yeah, I moved yesterday, are they mandated to come and tell you that they have a suspected, so there's no requirement for elementary school teachers to, I'm just picturing I'm kind of just picturing some kid who's in kindergarten,
Yeah.
excitedly telling his teacher that he moved, and then 2 weeks later, he has to go to school somewhere else, right? Doesn't,
Now, we try to be very mindful of that. But it is a concern. I mean, especially if you have if you're running at a full capacity kindergarten. But how we handle that is as gently as possible. I mean, in that case, we would be reaching out to the parent that, hey, this is, and sometimes kids just talk. So like, taking the word of a 5-year-old is probably not fair. And so we have to look into it before we would do anything from that. And then there are even cases like this year, we extended an enrollment for a short period of time because the student needed to acclimate. And we worked with the receiving town to make sure that they had the best transition possible.
yeah, I absolutely believe that we do this in as fair and compassionate a way as necessary. There's no doubt about that. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments, Mr. Domenici?
Well, more comment. I was curious as we're getting towards the end of the year how that would be handled. So Mr. Bowie's question was pretty spot on one to ask, because with the advent of like MCAS, or depending upon if it's a senior, or like there's got to be some circumstances where you're so close that it would be too detrimental to the child for that given year. But then they have to be done at that given year.
Yeah.
There's not an exact science is kind of what you're saying, but there's got to be a point in the year where it becomes like, we know that you shouldn't be here, but you're 9/10 of the way through the year.
Right.
What do we do? So.
And that's a conversation. And there are cases when it's appropriate to move, especially if you want a student to acclimate to a new system. Like there's factors, so that they can start the following year with friends and understanding the building. Like there's a lot of, I can make arguments in both directions, do you know what I mean?
Sure.
Depending on the student. As a senior, we wouldn't, that's actually one of the school committee policies, that they would be able to, finish out the year.
Yeah, after I said that, I kind of thought we had
Yeah, unless there's
we had a policy on the books, but but like my point was testing is coming toward, and you get to a certain point of the year. There's just no easy answer for this, because, we should be servicing students who are residents of Attleboro.
Right.
But at the same time, it's kind of like you don't want to harm the educational path of a student who may not have had any say in the fact that they had to move, so.
Correct. Yeah, it's not the student's fault.
Yeah.
So, we try to do it again. And there are cases where we have to close, the case.
Yeah.
Because it can also be, it can continue on for too long. So it depends on the situation.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you so much.
One final piece of business.
From you. The agenda goes beyond your report, Mr.
Yes.
Sawyer.
I'm only concerned about what I have to carry. So I'm looking for approval to be appointed as your representative at the BICO board.
Yes, this is, every year we do need to vote to appoint really a member of central office, but no, it has to be the
It
superintendent.
has to be me.
So with that, I will entertain a motion to appoint Superintendent David Sawyer as the Bi-County Collaborative Representative for the Attleboro Public School District for the 2024-2025 school year.
So moved.
Second.
All right. Any questions or comments?
What is
Mr.
the
Bennett?
BICO board?
So we belong to the Bi-County Collaborative, which is a special ed collaborative. So it's basically several districts, almost 20 of us, that share special ed programming. And there's a member rate, which is lower than what we charge non-members for setting students to those programs. And under Mass law, there's a board that oversees that, and Attleboro actually has a financial stake in it because we're part owners of it. So if it was mismanaged and there was, financial liabilities, Attleboro would have to share that. So it's actually a real responsibility to go there and make sure that everything happening there is being run in accordance with law and educational practices, and the superintendents from all the districts share that responsibility.
Thank you.
And if I'm not mistaken, it's bi-county because it's Bristol and Norfolk County, right?
Correct.
So what the districts go from, I want to say, does it go all the way down to Swansea, or is it just Dayton Rehoboth?
It does go to Swansea,
And then as far up as Franklin,
even further, yeah.
yeah, so it's a pretty
One of the
sizable
H's,
group.
Hopkinton, Holliston.
Yeah, it does go, okay.
Yeah. I think we recently added Uxbridge. I don't know.
Well, maybe, yeah.
A lot of people there.
Any other questions or comments? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Congratulations on your appointment.
I'm very excited, thank you. That concludes my report.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Sawyer. Next on the agenda is approving the minutes from our March 25th, 2024 meeting. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All right, any comments or corrections? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Motion passes. Consent agenda. We have 8 items tonight. Motion to accept a donation from BJ's Restaurant Incorporated for $168.80 to the class of 2024. Motion to accept a donation from BJ Restaurants Incorporated for $219.29 for the class of 2024. Motion to accept a donation from CIBG Don and Gigi's Restaurant for $1,185 for the class of 2024. Motion to accept a cash donation to the High School Drama Club in the amount of $1,127.81 from audience members at the performance of The Little Mermaid to be used for operating expenses when the Drama Club hosts the New England Theater Festival, April 18th through 21st, 2024. Motion to accept a donation in the amount of $5,000 from the Feinstein Foundation Incorporated to Hill Roberts Gifts donation line. Motion to approve a day field trip for 156 grade 8 Wamsutta Middle School students to go to Canobie Lake Park on June 10, 2024. Motion to accept an overnight international field trip for 20 to 25 grade 9 through 12 students to visit Iceland from February 14, 2026 to February 20th, 2026. Motion to approve an overnight international field trip for 20 to 25 grade 9 through 12 students to visit Belize from February 13th, 2027 to February 20th, 2027.
So moved.
Second.
All right, any questions or comments, Mr. Larson?
My only comment is that the Drama Club did a great job with their performance over the weekend. I had the opportunity to go, and it was very enjoyable.
And I will add to that, the multi-level concerts, they were also accepting donations at those events where middle schoolers performed with high schoolers. Those were all incredible to see. I will also say that I'm grateful to all of our local restaurants, both for their support of our schools in fundraising efforts, but for the incredible food that they serve, because those are my favorite fundraisers. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Subcommittee reports. For Finance and Budget, I'll turn it over to Mr. Larson.
Thank you. The Finance and Budget Subcommittee met Wednesday, April 3rd. Ms. Perella and Mr. Furtado took us through the monthly budget reports. We're still on track for the projected surplus at the end of the year that we've been talking about right along. We had a brief update on the projects going on in all the schools. The train project's going well. We talked about some of the items that were on the capital capital improvement, thank you, list, and the tours that the city council took with members at Peter Thatcher and at Coelho. We talked about the budget that we talked about earlier here. We started a conversation about redistricting. We're going to talk more about that at our hopefully at our May subcommittee meeting, which is May 1st. The Lab Council done a lot of the legwork ahead of this for us, and has a couple groups for us to listen to. that we may want to investigate further in this redistricting plan. So if anyone has any interest in listening to that, they should attend the May 1st subcommittee meeting. We've invited the Lab Council to also participate. They've done, as I said, they've done a lot of the legwork up until this point. Now they need input from us. We talked about the maintenance and grounds contract that we need to send out, and we have a prior year invoice. So there are two motions before us tonight. One is that subcommittee recommended to the full committee the approval of the RFP for the maintenance in the grounds and athletic fields. And I believe this is a 3-year contract. Is that correct? I believe you had all the information in the packet.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, are there any questions, concerns? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Motion passes. And lastly, we have a request to send to the municipal council for approval of prior year invoices in the amount of $72.22, and this will be paid for from school funds.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions? I believe everyone had copies of the invoices. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, motion passes. That is it. Thank you.
Thank you. So next item on the agenda is open forum. This is a time when members of the public may address the school committee. Open forum is not a time for committee members to engage in dialogue with members of the public. Guidelines for open forum are available to you. Please know that we are interested in what you have to say, but we cannot respond without background information on your issue. If there is anyone that would like to address the committee for open forum, please come to the podium and state your name and address. Seeing none, I will close open forum. Couple of upcoming reminders. April 10th, which is this Wednesday, National Honor Society Night in the AHS cafeteria at 6 p.m. Reminder that next week is April vacation, so enjoy the marathon on Monday. And as we mentioned, the Drama Club is hosting the New England Theater Festival here at Attleboro High School, April 18th to 21st. That will have schools from all 6 New England states, I believe, coming to participate and compete. So it should be a fantastic weekend of performances. Ms. Nelson also forwarded to the committee today an invitation to the Pride Month celebration. Forgive me, I don't have it in front. I believe it was June 2nd at City Hall. So those details were shared with everyone. Any other updates or announcements for the committee? Mr. Domenici?
Just a quick comment on, it's really something that our auditorium continues to be like a shining centerpiece of the building. As Rob mentioned, representatives, schools from all 6 New England states are coming. So there's going to be a lot of traffic coming in and out, but there is opportunities to go see the shows. A lot of our students will be spending their spring break supporting the efforts going on. Good way to pick up hours for those who need it. And just again, just a really cool thing that we're able to once again show off this building in a pretty large capacity when you consider this is a New England-wide event. So there's going to be people coming in from all parts of the region, and I just thought that should get some additional kudos to Mr. Tarsi, the Drama Club, and everybody else who's going to be supporting on that weekend.
Any other announcements or updates? All right.
Prism concert has been rescheduled, that was rescheduled, is tomorrow night.
The Prism concert was rescheduled to tomorrow night.
Yes, it had been, so.
What time?
7 o'clock, I believe.
Thank you.
7 o'clock in the Bray?
Oh, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Campbell. So with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Have a great night.
Okay.